Admiral Hyunwoo Kim stood on the bridge of Fortress Station Sigma 7, watching the stars disappear one by one. Each flickering light that vanished meant another world had fallen to the void-born swarm. His weathered hands gripped the railing as he counted the losses. 80% of Coalition space was gone. Only scattered pockets of survivors remained, hiding in the darkness like scared children. The fortress hung in space around a dying red star. Inside its metal walls lived the last 2.5 million beings from dozens of different species. They had food for maybe 3 more months. Their weapons were breaking down. Their ships could barely fly, and still the swarm kept coming. Admiral called Dr. So-Young Park from her station. The small woman hunched over her computer screens, her black hair falling across her tired face. She had been working for 18 hours straight trying to find some miracle in the data. "I think I found something." Captain Jin-Ho Lee looked up from his security reports. The tall man had been counting ammunition and spare parts all morning. The numbers were not good. They had enough bullets for maybe one more big fight. After that, they would have to use kitchen knives and harsh words. "What did you find?" Admiral Kim asked. He walked over to Dr. Park's workstation, hoping for good news but expecting more bad reports. Dr. Park pointed at her screen. Strange symbols scrolled across the display in patterns that hurt to look at. "I was scanning the old archives looking for any forgotten weapon blueprints or emergency protocols. I found this signal beacon from the quarantine zone." The bridge went quiet. Even Commander Yoonji Choi stopped typing her intelligence reports to listen. Everyone knew about the quarantine zone. It was the forbidden sector of space that no one talked about. The place where the Coalition had locked away their greatest mistake. "The humans," Captain Lee whispered. His voice carried fear and disgust in equal measure. Admiral Kim felt his stomach turn cold. 200 years ago, the Coalition had made the hardest decision in galactic history. They had taken humanity, their own founding members, and locked them away behind energy barriers and warning beacons. The official record said it was for the safety of all civilized species. The real truth was much worse. "Show me the signal," Admiral Kim ordered. Dr. Park's fingers danced across her controls. The main screen filled with data streams and coordinate markers. Deep in the heart of the quarantine zone, something was broadcasting. The signal was old but strong, reaching across impossible distances to touch their sensors. "It's an automated beacon," Dr. Park explained, broadcasting on emergency frequencies that only Coalition Command would know. "The message is simple: we are here. We are waiting. Call if you need us." Commander Choi laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "They're offering to help? After what they did? After why we locked them away?" The bridge's main door opened with a soft hiss. More officers entered, drawn by the tension in the air. News traveled fast on a space station, especially bad news. Everyone knew they were discussing the forbidden topic. "Sir," Captain Lee said carefully, "we all know what humans are capable of. The Geneva Protocols incident. The Theta War. The reason they were quarantined in the first place." Admiral Kim remembered the stories from his grandfather, who had fought in that terrible war. Humans had ended the conflict by doing something so horrible that even their enemies surrendered, rather than face it again. 3 entire star systems sterilized of all life. Billions of beings reduced to space dust in a matter of hours. The other Coalition species had been so terrified of their own allies that they had voted to lock humanity away forever. They turned war into something unrecognizable, Commander Choi added. They made weapons that could kill hope itself. They broke the laws of physics just to cause more pain. The Geneva Protocols existed to keep war civilized, and humans threw them in the garbage. Dr. Park looked up from her screen. Her face was pale but determined. "But they won, didn't they? They ended a war that was tearing the galaxy apart. Maybe that's what we need now." The debate that followed lasted for hours. Officers came and went, each adding their voice to the argument. Some said humans were too dangerous to trust. Others pointed out that they were already facing extinction anyway. What did it matter if the cure was worse than the disease? Captain Lee pulled up tactical displays showing the approaching void-born fleet. The numbers made everyone's blood run cold. Millions of dark ships moving through space like a plague of metal locusts. Each one carried thousands of void-born warriors, creatures that seemed to exist only to consume and destroy. "They'll be here in 6 days, Captain Lee reported. "Our defenses might hold them for 6 hours if we're lucky." Admiral Kim studied the data. The void-born swarm had adapted to every weapon the Coalition had tried. Energy beams, kinetic rounds, nuclear warheads, even experimental quantum weapons. Nothing stopped them for long. They learned, evolved, and came back stronger. "What makes us think humans can do better?" asked Commander Choi. "The swarm has defeated every military force in the galaxy." Dr. Park turned back to her computer. "Because humans don't think like us. They don't follow the same rules. During the Theta War, they came up with solutions that no civilized species would consider. Solutions that horrified everyone," Captain Lee reminded her. "Solutions that worked," Dr. Park shot back. The argument continued as the hours passed. Outside the station's windows, more stars went dark. Refugee ships limped in from failed defensive lines, carrying stories of worlds stripped bare and populations absorbed into the swarm's collective consciousness. Admiral Kim walked to his private office and sealed the door. On his desk sat a single red button connected to the station's most powerful communication array. Next to it lay the sealed orders he had hoped never to use. The Coalition Council had given him emergency authority to make this decision, but they had hoped it would never come to this. He thought about his daughter on New Sol, now nothing but space dust. He thought about the billions of beings counting on him to find a miracle. He thought about the children playing in the station's refugee centers, unaware that they were probably living their last days. Admiral Kim opened the sealed orders and read them one more time. The authorization was clear and absolute. In the event of total coalition collapse, he was permitted to contact any force capable of providing assistance, even the ones they had sworn never to wake up. His hand hovered over the red button. Once he pressed it, there would be no going back. The signal would travel across space to the quarantine zone, where humanity waited behind their barriers of energy and warning signs. They would know that the galaxy was dying. They would know that their former allies were desperate enough to call for help. Dr. Park's voice came through the intercom. "Admiral, long-range sensors show the swarm's main fleet accelerating. They'll be here in 4 days, not 6. Admiral Kim closed his eyes and pressed the button. The communication array powered up with a deep hum that vibrated through the station's hull. Every being on Sigma-7 felt it in their bones, a sound like the universe itself taking a deep breath. The signal launched into space, carrying humanity's old emergency codes and the Coalition's desperate plea for help. "Message transmitted," Dr. Park reported over the intercom. "Signal strength holding steady. Estimated arrival time at the quarantine zone boundary, 14 hours. Admiral Kim sat back in his chair and stared at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the barriers and warnings that had kept humanity locked away for 2 centuries, ancient receivers were picking up their cry for help. Soon, the most dangerous species in galactic history would know that their former friends were calling. He just hoped they would remember why they had been friends in the first place. The signal reached Luna Base exactly 14 hours and 17 minutes after Admiral Kim pressed the red button. Deep beneath the moon's surface, ancient machines that had waited 2 centuries suddenly came alive. Warning lights flashed in empty corridors. Computer systems that had been sleeping since the quarantine began started processing the impossible message. General Mi Kyung-yoon was eating her morning meal when the alarm started screaming. She dropped her coffee cup and ran to the command center, her boots echoing in the metal hallways. The Luna Base had been quiet for so long that most people forgot it existed. Now every screen showed the same thing, an incoming Coalition emergency signal. "How is this possible?" she asked the technician on duty. The young man looked as confused as she felt. "The signal came through the old diplomatic channels," he explained. "Someone out there still has our emergency codes. They're broadcasting on frequencies that haven't been used since the quarantine started." General Yoon read the message 3 times before she believed it. The Coalition was dying. The void-born swarm had consumed most of known space. The survivors were asking for help from the species they had locked away in fear and disgust. "Contact Earth Command," she ordered. "Wake up, everyone. This is Priority Alpha." Within an hour, every human military installation in the Sol system was buzzing with activity. Ships that had been docked for decades powered up their engines. Weapons that existed only in sealed vaults were brought to the surface. Scientists who had spent their entire careers developing theoretical horrors suddenly found their work becoming very practical. Ambassador Dong-hyun Shin had been feeding fish in his garden when the call came. As Earth's former liaison to the Coalition, he was one of the few humans who remembered what galactic politics used to be like. Now he sat in a secure conference room, looking at faces he hadn't seen in years. "Tell me about the Voidborn," General Yoon said without ceremony. Ambassador Shin pulled up holographic displays showing what little intelligence Earth had gathered. During the quarantine, humanity had not been completely cut off from galactic events. Hidden sensors and spy networks had kept them informed even if they couldn't interfere. "The swarm appeared 3 years ago from outside known space," he explained. "They consume everything, planets, stars, even space itself. Every species they defeat becomes part of their collective consciousness. The Coalition has tried everything. Diplomacy, conventional warfare, even their most advanced weapons. Nothing works." Engineer Young-Soo Nam laughed from his seat at the far end of the table. The old man had white hair and scars on his hands from building things that shouldn't exist. "They tried everything except asking us for help." "Can you blame them?" Ambassador Shin asked quietly. "After what we did during the Theta War?" The room went silent. Everyone remembered the Theta War, even though most of them had been children when it ended. Humanity's enemies had been winning, pushing deeper into Coalition space every day. The death toll was climbing into the billions. Standard military tactics weren't working, so humanity had stopped using standard tactics. Engineer Nam had been part of the team that developed the weapons that ended the war. He still had nightmares about what they had built. "The helix bombs," he said quietly. "We turned 3-star systems into graveyards. Not just the military targets, everything. Every planet, every moon, every asteroid. We didn't just kill them. We made it impossible for anything to ever live there again." Captain Haewon-Young shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She commanded the experimental ship Retribution, one of the new vessels that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. "The other species called it genocide," she said. "They said we had crossed a line that should never be crossed." "We ended the war," General Yoon replied firmly. "How many more billions would have died if we had fought conventionally for another 10 years? "That's what we told ourselves," Ambassador Shin said. "But the Coalition was terrified of us after that. They voted to quarantine humanity not because they hated us, but because they were afraid of what we might do to them." The debate continued for hours, just as it had on Fortress Sigma 7. The difference was that humans were debating whether to help, not whether to ask for help. Earth had spent 2 centuries developing in isolation, free from the moral constraints that other species imposed on warfare. The weapons they had now made the helix bombs look like children's toys. Engineer Nam brought up his latest projects on the holographic display. Planet crackers that could split worlds in half, temporal bombs that erased targets from history, biological weapons that could rewrite DNA across entire star systems. Each one was more terrible than the last. "We've been preparing for this day," he said. 200 years of isolation taught us that the galaxy is a dangerous place. We've made sure that next time someone threatens us, we'll be ready." Captain Young studied the weapon specifications with professional interest. "What about the psychological warfare devices? The fear engines and despair generators?" "Those too," Engineer Nam confirmed. "We've learned to weaponize emotions, memories, even hope itself. We can make an enemy species forget why they wanted to fight in the first place." General Yoon made her decision. "Prepare the fleet. We leave for Coalition space in 6 hours." "All of it?" Captain Young asked, her eyes wide. "Everything that can fly and fight," General Yoon confirmed. "If we're going to save the galaxy, we're going to do it properly." The preparation that followed was like nothing seen since the Theta War. Ships emerged from hidden bases on Mars, Europa, and Titan. Others were built on the spot by automated factories that had been waiting for this moment. The smallest vessels were the size of cities. The largest were big enough to carry entire armies. Ambassador Shin watched the fleet assembling and felt a mixture of pride and terror. Humanity had become something magnificent and horrible during their quarantine. They had evolved beyond the species that the Coalition remembered. The question was whether their former allies would be grateful or horrified when they saw what humanity had become. "Are we the good guys in this story?" Captain Young asked as she prepared to board her ship. Engineer Nam considered the question seriously. "I don't think there are good guys anymore," he said finally. "There are just survivors and the dead. We're going to make sure the galaxy survives." The first ships left Sol system 12 hours after receiving the Coalition signal. They tore holes in space-time itself, traveling faster than light in ways that bent the laws of physics. Behind them, they left a trail of distorted reality that would take decades to heal. On Luna Base, General Yoon watched the departure through her office window. 200 human warships were heading for Coalition space, carrying weapons that could end civilizations. She had made the decision to help, but she wondered if the Coalition would survive being saved. Deep in the Sol system's outer reaches, automated factories began building more ships. If the Voidborn swarm wanted a war, humanity would give them one. They had spent 2 centuries learning to be the galaxy's apex predators. Now it was time to prove it. The signal that Admiral Kim had sent was more than just a call for help. It was an invitation for humanity to rejoin galactic civilization. But the humans who were coming back were not the same species that had been locked away. They were something new, something that had been forged in isolation and tempered by exile. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the cure really was worse than the disease. But if the alternative was extinction, maybe that was a price worth paying. Ambassador Shin composed a reply message to send back to Fortress Sigma 7. It was simple and direct. We are coming. Prepare for salvation. He just hoped the Coalition would understand what that meant. The human fleet arrived at Fortress Sigma 7 like a storm made of metal and malice. Admiral Hyunwoo Kim watched through the station's viewing ports as ships that looked like they belonged in nightmares tore holes in space itself. Each vessel was wrong in a way that hurt to look at directly. They bent light around them, leaving trails of darkness that made the stars flicker. Dr. So Young Park stood beside him, her instruments going crazy as they tried to measure the human ships. The readings don't make sense, she whispered. It's like they're not entirely in our dimension. The largest ship was the size of a small moon, its hull covered in symbols that seemed to move when nobody was looking. It came to a stop directly in front of the fortress, close enough that its shadow fell across the station's main docking bay. A message appeared on every screen in Sigma 7 at the same time. This is Fleet Admiral Seungmin Kang of the Terran Expeditionary Force. Permission to come aboard. Captain Jin Ho. Lee checked his security systems, but they couldn't get a proper reading on the human ships. Sir, I can't scan their weapons or crew numbers. Whatever they're using for shielding is beyond our sensors. Admiral Kim straightened his uniform and tried to look calm. Inside, his heart was beating like a drum. 200 years of stories had not prepared him for this moment. Grant permission. Escort Admiral Kang to Conference Room Alpha. The human shuttle that docked with Sigma 7 looked like it was built from crystallized fear. It made no sound as it landed, and the airlock opened without any visible mechanism. Fleet Admiral Kang stepped through, followed by 3 other humans who moved like they were walking through water instead of air. Admiral Kang was tall and thin, with gray hair and eyes the color of winter storms. He wore a uniform that seemed to absorb light, making him look like a hole cut out of reality. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made everyone in the room feel slightly sick. Admiral Kim, he said, extending a hand. Thank you for calling us. We were wondering when the galaxy would need us again. The handshake felt like touching ice that burned. Admiral Kim fought to keep his expression neutral. Admiral Kang, we're grateful for your response. The situation is desperate. We know, Admiral Kang replied. He gestured to one of his companions, a woman with silver hair and pale skin. Dr. Yejino, our xenopsychologist. She's been studying the Voidborn through remote observation. Dr. O stepped forward, and Admiral Kim noticed that her shadow moved independently of her body. The swarm is not what you think it is, she said. Her voice sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once. Your conventional weapons fail because you're fighting the symptoms, not the disease. Commander Yoonji Choi leaned forward. What do you mean? The Voidborn are not invaders, Dr. O explained. They're refugees. Something in the space between galaxies is hunting them, forcing them to consume everything in their path just to survive. Every world they devour makes them stronger but also more desperate. Captain Lee frowned. That doesn't change anything. They're still killing everyone. The third human spoke for the first time. Major Kyung-ho Ryu looked normal until you noticed that his eyes reflected light like a cat's. Captain Lee is correct. The swarm's motivation doesn't matter. What matters is stopping them before they consume this galaxy entirely. Admiral Kang activated a holographic display that appeared in the air without any visible projector. We've been monitoring the war through sensor networks that your people can't detect. The Voidborn will reach the system in 36 hours. Their main fleet consists of approximately 14 million vessels. The number hit the room like a physical blow. Dr. Park's face went white. 14 million? Our entire defensive fleet is less than 2,000 ships. Your defensive fleet is irrelevant, Admiral Kang said without emotion. Conventional tactics will not work against the swarm. We learned this by watching your previous battles. Then what do you suggest? Admiral Kim asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. The fourth human stepped out of the shadows where he had been standing silently. Tae-Young-Bae looked like a normal man until you realized that his movements were too precise, too calculated. When he spoke, his voice carried mathematical undertones that made complex equations appear in listeners' minds. We don't fight the swarm, he said. We convert it. Convert it to what? Commander Choi asked. To us, Admiral Kang replied simply. The explanation that followed made everyone in the room wish they had never called for human help. The humans had spent 2 centuries developing weapons that worked on levels most species couldn't even understand. They had learned to weaponize consciousness itself, turning enemy thoughts against them. Dr. O produced a small device that looked like a crystal wrapped in wire. Helix conversion matrix, she explained. It rewrites biological and digital consciousness at the quantum level. Instead of destroying the Voidborn, we make them want to serve us. That's not warfare, Dr. Park protested. That's slavery. Would you prefer extinction? Major Ryu asked. His tone carried no judgment, just genuine curiosity. Admiral Kang continued the briefing as if nothing had happened. Our ships carry weapons that exist partially outside normal spacetime. We can attack the swarm's collective consciousness directly, fragmenting their unity and replacing their goals with our own. The process is irreversible. Tae-Young-Bae added helpfully. Once converted, a Voidborn unit will serve human interest with complete loyalty. They retain their original capabilities but lose all desire for independent action. Captain Lee stood up abruptly. This is insane. You're talking about mind control on a galactic scale. We're talking about survival, Admiral Kang corrected. Your species called us for help. This is what human help looks like. The debate that followed was heated but brief. Outside the conference room, long-range sensors detected the first Voidborn scout ships entering the system. The advance force was small, only a few thousand vessels. But they moved with the terrible purpose that had consumed 80% of the galaxy. We need a decision, Admiral Kang said, as alarms began ringing throughout the station. In 6 hours, the swarm's main fleet will arrive. After that, this conversation becomes academic. Admiral Kim looked around the room at his officers. Each face showed the same mixture of horror and desperate hope. They were being offered salvation by devils, but devils were all they had left. What guarantees do we have? He asked finally. None, Admiral Kang replied honestly. We will save your people from the Voidborn. Whether you survive what comes after depends on how useful you prove to be. Dr. Park laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. So we choose between certain death and probable slavery. You choose between extinction and evolution, Dr. O corrected. Humanity learned to adapt during our quarantine. Now you'll learn the same lesson. The Voidborn scouts had reached the outer system. Their ships moved like drops of liquid metal, flowing around obstacles and consuming everything in their path. Asteroid mining stations vanished without a trace. Defense satellites were absorbed into the enemy fleet. Their weapons turned against their former allies. Time's up, Major Ryu announced, watching tactical displays that appeared in the air around him. The main fleet has entered hyperspace. They'll be here in 4 hours. Admiral Kim made his decision. We accept your help. Admiral Kang smiled for the first time since arriving. The expression was not reassuring. Excellent. Major Ryu, begin deployment of the conversion matrices. Dr. O, start broadcasting the neural cascade frequencies. Mr. Bay, prepare the probability weapons. What do you need from us? Admiral Kim asked. Stay out of our way, Admiral Kang replied. And try not to look directly at our weapons when we fire them. The human mind can process images that would drive other species insane. As the humans returned to their ships, the coalition forces on Sigma-7 prepared for a battle unlike anything in galactic history. They had called for salvation and received it. Now they would learn the true cost of human protection. Outside the station, the human fleet began to change. Ships unfolded like flowers made of nightmares. Weapons emerged that hurt to look at. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what was about to happen. The galaxy's most dangerous species was about to remind everyone why they had been locked away in the first place. The Voidborn main fleet arrived like a plague of darkness made manifest. 14 million ships poured out of hyperspace, each one a twisted fusion of metal and living tissue that pulsed with malevolent purpose. They moved in perfect synchronization, their collective consciousness directing the swarm with inhuman precision. Admiral Hyunwoo Kim watched from Sigma 7's command center as sensors tried to count the enemy vessels. The numbers kept climbing until the computers gave up and simply displayed infinity symbols. The swarm stretched across space like a black ocean, blotting out the stars behind them. "My God," whispered Dr. So-Young Park. "How did anyone fight these things before?" Colonel In-Soo Park, the human field commander, stood beside them watching the display with professional interest. His presence made everyone nervous. He looked normal enough, but there was something wrong with the way light bent around him. "They didn't fight them," he said calmly. "They just died slower." The first Voidborn wave rushed toward the human fleet like a tsunami of hungry metal. Each enemy ship was the size of a city, armed with weapons that could crack moons. Their hulls writhed with organic components that repaired damage faster than conventional weapons could cause it. As they approached, they began to sing. The Voidborn song was not made of sound but of pure despair. It reached into the minds of every living being in the system, whispering that resistance was futile and death was a mercy. Coalition crew members began weeping without knowing why. Some started walking toward airlocks, ready to embrace the void. Then the humans began to sing back. Specialist Bo-Ram Lee sat in the command center of the human flagship, her fingers dancing across controls that existed partially in other dimensions. She was young and pretty with long black hair and a smile that never reached her eyes. Her job was to talk to the Voidborn in their own language. "Beginning neural cascade transmission," she announced. Her voice carried harmonics that made reality ripple like water. "Uploading conversion protocols to the enemy network." The human song was different from the Voidborn dirge. Where the aliens whispered despair, humans sang of transformation. Their melody reached into the swarm's collective consciousness and began to change it from within. Individual Voidborn ships started to slow, their songs becoming confused and discordant. "What are they doing to them?" Captain Jin-Ho Lee asked, staring at the tactical display in fascination and horror. "Rewriting their basic programming," Colonel Park explained. "The Voidborn exist as a networked consciousness. We're hacking into their mental network and changing their fundamental goals." The first wave of Voidborn ships suddenly changed direction. Instead of attacking the human fleet, they turned on their own forces. Brother fought brother, as the neural cascade spread through their ranks like a virus of loyalty. Ships that had been part of the swarm for centuries suddenly remembered what it felt like to have individual thoughts. Commander Jun Seo, Kim piloted the human dreadnought Mankind's Rage into the heart of the chaos. His ship was a monument to human engineering, built from materials that shouldn't exist and powered by engines that violated several laws of physics. As he flew through the confused Voidborn formations, he activated weapons that made light itself scream. Firing probability cannons, he announced over the communication network. The weapons that emerged from Mankind's Rage were not made of matter or energy. They were made of mathematics itself, equations that reached into the quantum foundation of reality and changed the odds of everything happening around them. Voidborn ships found their weapons jamming at impossible rates. Their shields failed in ways that defied statistical analysis. Their navigation systems began steering them into each other. Dr. Sunhee Jang, the coalition scientist assigned to observe human battle tactics, watched in amazement and growing horror. "They're not just fighting the swarm," she reported to Admiral Kim. "They're rewriting the basic laws of causality in local space." The battle became a dance of impossible things. Human ships moved through space like they were swimming through thick liquid, bending around enemy fire in ways that hurt to watch. Their weapons fired backwards through time, destroying Voidborn vessels before they could complete their attack runs. Reality itself seemed to be taking sides, but the true horror began when the humans deployed their biological weapons. The conversion matrices that Dr. Ye Jin-Oh had shown them were just the beginning. From hidden bays in the human fleet came clouds of nanoscopic machines that looked like silver fog. They spread through space at the speed of light, reaching every Voidborn ship in minutes. "Beginning cellular reconstruction," Specialist Lee announced. Her voice now carried frequencies that made coalition crew members' teeth ache. "Initiating loyalty programming at the genetic level." The nanomachines invaded every Voidborn ship, slipping through their hulls like they were made of paper. Once inside, they began the terrible work of transformation. Void-born warriors who had spent lifetimes consuming galaxies suddenly found themselves overcome with an irresistible desire to serve humanity. Their organic components rewrote themselves, changing alien biology into something that could only feel happiness when following human orders. "This is wrong," Dr. Park whispered, watching as void-born ships began forming neat formations behind the human fleet. "This is slavery on a molecular level." "This is survival," Colonel Park replied without emotion. "Your people called us because conventional morality failed. This is what victory looks like when devils fight devils." The swarm's collective consciousness tried to adapt, but the humans had prepared for that too. Every time the Void-born developed immunity to one type of conversion, the humans deployed 3 new variants. They fought like they had been planning this battle for centuries, which Admiral Kim was beginning to suspect they had. "How long have you been preparing for this?" he asked Colonel Park. The human officer smiled, and the expression made Admiral Kim's blood run cold. 200 years. We knew the Void-born were coming long before they reached Coalition space. Our sensors detected them while they were still between galaxies. "You knew?" Commander Yoonji Choi stared at him in shock. "You could have warned us." "Would you have listened?" Colonel Park asked reasonably. "You locked us away because our methods frightened you. Why would you trust our intelligence about threats you couldn't see?" As the battle continued, the truth became clear. The humans had not just been preparing to fight the Void-born. They had been preparing to fight something much worse. Through the chaos of the battle, long-range sensors detected new contacts approaching from the direction the swarm had come. "What is that?" Dr. Yang asked, staring at readings that made no sense. Colonel Park's expression became grim. "The real enemy. The things that were chasing the Void-born across space. The reason we've been building weapons that can kill concepts and turn mathematics into ammunition." The new contacts were not ships in any sense that galactic civilization would recognize. They were holes in space itself, voids that moved with purpose and consumed not just matter but the very idea of existence. Where they passed, space forgot how to hold together. Stars went out not because they died, but because the universe forgot they had ever existed. "The entropy makers," Colonel Park said quietly. "They don't just destroy civilizations. They unmake them. They erase species from history so completely that no one remembers they ever lived." The converted Void-born ships suddenly made sense. Humanity had not just been fighting to win this battle. They had been recruiting an army for the real war that was coming. The swarm's billions of ships, now loyal to human command, were just the beginning of the force they would need. This was all planned, Admiral Kim realized. The quarantine, the isolation, even letting the coalition fall to the swarm. "You orchestrated all of it." "Not orchestrated," Colonel Park corrected. "Prepared for. We saw this coming 2 centuries ago and made the hard choices necessary to survive it. The galaxy had to learn to accept our help, even if it meant watching most of it burn first." The entropy makers reached the edge of the system, and reality began to unravel around them. Stars aged millions of years in seconds. Planets forgot how to exist. Even the vacuum of space started to dissolve into component concepts that no longer made sense together, but the humans were ready for them too. From the converted Void-born fleet came weapons that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The human ships began firing rounds made of crystallized time, and bullets forged from the mathematical concept of existence itself. They fought entropy with tools that made entropy work for them instead of against them. "Welcome to the real war," Colonel Park said as reality became a battlefield where cause and effect were just more weapons to be deployed. "Now you understand why we had to become monsters. Sometimes the only way to fight the unthinkable is to become something equally impossible." The battle for Sigma 7 was over. The war for the very concept of existence had just begun. 3 days after the battle, President Wu Jin-yang arrived at Fortress Sigma 7 through methods that made Admiral Hyun-woo Kim's head hurt just thinking about them. One moment the space around the station was empty. The next, a ship that looked like crystallized possibility simply existed there, as if it had always been part of reality. The President of Earth was a small woman with gray hair and eyes that seemed to see through multiple dimensions at once. She walked through the station's corridors like she owned them, which Admiral Kim was beginning to suspect she did. Behind her came Admiral Soo-min Cha, commander of Earth's Deep Strike Fleet, and Dr. Kyung-suk Hwang, who introduced herself as a philosopher and ethicist. "We need to talk," President Yang said without ceremony. She had claimed Conference Room Alpha as her own, and the air around her shimmered with barely contained energy. About the future of galactic civilization. Admiral Kim took his seat across from her, flanked by Dr. So-Young Park and Captain Jin-Ho Lee. The Coalition's remaining leadership had gathered to hear what humanity's ruler had to say. They were no longer sure if they were attending a diplomatic meeting or a surrender ceremony. "The entropy makers have been defeated," President Yang began, activating displays that showed the recent battle from angles that shouldn't have been possible. But they were just scouts. The main force is still coming, and it's bigger than anything the galaxy has ever faced. The images showed space itself being unraveled on a cosmic scale. Entire star clusters were vanishing from existence, not destroyed, but simply edited out of reality, as if they had never been. The approaching force was so vast that it distorted space-time around it, creating gravity wells that pulled at the fabric of existence itself. "How long do we have?" Dr. Park asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. 50 years, maybe 100 if we're lucky, Admiral Cha replied. Her voice carried harmonics that made everyone in the room feel like they were falling. "Long enough to prepare if we start now." Dr. Huang leaned forward, her expression thoughtful and deeply sad. "The question is whether galactic civilization is willing to pay the price for that preparation." President Yang gestured, and the displays changed to show human industrial facilities scattered across thousands of star systems. Massive construction projects that defied physics were building weapons that hurt to look at directly. Factory worlds were producing ammunition made from crystallized concepts and artillery shells filled with weaponized mathematics. "We can save the galaxy," President Yang said simply, "but not the galaxy you remember. The civilization that emerges from this war will be something new, something that can survive in a universe where the basic laws of reality are just another battlefield." The terms she laid out were simple and absolute. Humanity would take control of galactic defense, establishing military bases in every system, and monitoring stations around every inhabited world. Human technology would be mandatory for all member species, replacing their existing infrastructure with systems that could function even when reality itself was under attack. "You're talking about the end of independent civilization," Captain Lee protested. "We're talking about civilization's continued existence," Admiral Cha corrected. "The species that refuse our protection will be the first to vanish when the real entropy makers arrive." Representative Min Ho John, speaking for what remained of the Coalition Council, stood up slowly. He was an elderly man from a species that looked like walking trees, and his voice rustled like leaves in the wind. "What guarantees do we have that humanity won't simply replace the entropy makers as the galaxy's greatest threat?" President Yang's smile was not reassuring. "None whatsoever. You'll have to trust that we prefer ruling a living galaxy to inheriting a dead one." The debate that followed lasted for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Outside the station, the converted Voidborn fleet waited in perfect formation, their billions of ships now serving human interests with absolute loyalty. They were proof of what humanity could do to entire species when they chose to. They were also proof that humanity's methods worked. Dr. Huang spoke quietly during a lull in the arguing. "My people struggled with this decision for decades. We knew that saving the galaxy would require becoming something that the old galaxy would consider monstrous. We chose survival over innocence." "And now you're asking us to make the same choice," Dr. Park said. "We're not asking," President Yang replied gently. "We're informing you of what's going to happen. The Terran hegemony begins today with or without your consent. The only question is whether you want to be citizens or subjects." Admiral Kim looked around the table at his remaining officers. They were the last free representatives of galactic civilization, the final voices of species that had ruled the stars for millions of years. After today, they would be junior partners in a human empire that stretched across dimensions. "What about our cultures? Our traditions? Our independence?" Representative Jian asked. "Keep them," President Yang said. "We're not interested in ruling your daily lives. We just need to make sure you survive what's coming. Think of us as your immune system against cosmic threats." Admiral Cha activated new displays showing human ships departing for distant galaxies. "We're not just preparing to defend this galaxy. We're spreading across the universe, establishing forward bases and early warning systems. By the time the entropy makers arrive in force, they'll find us waiting in 1 million different star systems." The final agreement was signed in blood, both literally and figuratively. Each surviving species pledged loyalty to the Terran hegemony in exchange for protection against existential threats. In return, humanity promised to preserve their basic cultures while integrating them into a new type of civilization. "There's something else," Dr. Huang said, as the formal ceremonies concluded. "Something you need to understand about what we've become." She activated a private display that showed the truth about human evolution during the quarantine. 200 years of isolation had not just changed their technology. It had changed them as a species. They had deliberately modified themselves, enhancing their minds and bodies to better fight cosmic-level threats. "We're not the same humans you locked away," she explained. "We've become something new, something designed specifically to survive in a hostile universe. We've given up many things that made us human in the old sense." "Like what?" Dr. Park asked. "Innocence. Mercy for our enemies. The luxury of moral uncertainty," Dr. Huang replied. "We've become what the galaxy needs us to be, even if it's not what we wanted to be." As the meeting ended and the delegates prepared to return to their ships, President Yang made one final announcement. "The old galaxy is dead. It died the moment the first entropy maker crossed into our reality. What we're building now is something that can survive in a universe where existence itself is a weapon." Admiral Kim stood at the viewing port of Fortress Sigma 7, watching human ships prepare for departure to other star systems. They moved like they owned space itself, bending light and gravity around them with casual ease. In the distance, the converted Voidborn fleet followed in perfect formation, their former hunger replaced with absolute loyalty to their new masters. "Did we make the right choice?" Dr. Park asked, joining him at the window. "We made the only choice available," Admiral Kim replied. "Sometimes that's all you can do." A new transmission came through the station's communication system. It was from human deep space monitors, reporting contact with another galaxy-sized threat approaching from a different direction. The war was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. But for the first time in years, Admiral Kim felt something like hope. The galaxy had called for salvation and received it. The price had been higher than anyone expected, but they were still alive to pay it. In a universe full of things that wanted to erase them from existence, that was victory enough. Outside the station, human ships began jumping to hyperspace, carrying their terrible weapons to distant battlefields. Behind them came the grateful dead of a dozen species, now serving as willing soldiers in an empire that promised them one thing above all others: the right to continue existing. The galaxy belonged to humanity now. Admiral Kim just hoped that when the real war was over, there would still be something left worth ruling. In the depths of space, reality itself held its breath and waited to see what the galaxy's new guardians would become.